Welcome to Buildings and Beyond,
the podcast that explores how we can create a more sustainable built environment
by focusing on efficiency, accessibility, and health.
Hey everyone, Alex Marabli here, co-producer and co-editor of the Buildings and Beyond podcast. In part 2 of this Roundtable series, the group shifts their discussion toward high-performance buildings. Speaking from their experience, they explain why initiatives centered around occupant health and building sustainability should be prioritized when setting project goals. They also discuss how the pandemic has influenced project priorities and building operations, and share their thoughts on where they think the industry is heading. As a reminder, our guests are Michelle DeCarlo, Associate Partner at JB&B and President of Commercial Real Estate for Women in New York, also known as CREW, Saeideh Kirby, Senior Director of Energy and Sustainability Services at JLL, and Erin McElwee, Building Systems Consultant at Stephen Winter Associates. In case you missed it, I highly encourage you to check out part 1 of this roundtable discussion, which focuses on gender equity in the workplace. Here's your host, Kelly Westby.
With a quick question to get us kind of moving along. What do you feel is the biggest challenge we face improving building performance today? Why don't we start with you, Michelle?
I have to go with money on this one because I think everybody starts out with the best of intentions to have the most sustainable or the most energy efficient design, or, as we get into decarbonization, everybody wants to do the right thing. And then they realize how much space that takes up, and that adds capital cost. Or they get the pricing on how more sophisticated infrastructure costs more than what they were used to, or enhanced curtain wall, or whatever it may be. So really, in the end, it's just dollars.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I in my notes, I put money too. I'm not a homeowner, but I have some friends here at SWA that are homeowners, and I've heard, and of course, we're all about sustainability is what we recommend to our clients, but even some of our own people here, like, you can't.
Erin, airing our dirty laundry.
But when an air source heat pump for like electrifying DHW is $8,000 to $10,000 from a conversation I overheard, like, in this economy, the average homeowner can't swing that. So even, and that's, I guess, on a single family scale.
Yeah, that's a great perspective from no matter who you are, whether you have a lot of money and you're owning multiple large buildings in the commercial real estate space or developing new buildings, or you're a single family homeowner, money is obviously on the table. Yeah,
my parents have been trying to do solar forever now, but that initial upfront cost is what has been stopping them, and figuring out how to get the incentives, if there are any in one state or municipality, is also tough because it's not common knowledge. It's not well broadcasted.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I think for me, the complexity of the buildings and the diverse range of the factors that can impact how we operate the buildings and then help it to kind of improve the performance of that is a really important factor. And that, of course, to both of your points, there's an upfront cost for any improvement that can be made. So when we're thinking about the building performance, there are different things that has to be touched at the same time. So when you're trying to make an improvement, you can't just focus on one factor versus the other. You have to look at that building as a whole. And that upfront cost that goes within that decision making and that process is usually the biggest challenge and burden for a lot of clients, and even to your point, the people that are homeowners, that's usually a big role in the challenge.
And you tied it a little bit to kind of execution, the complexity of execution. I wonder how everyone else is feeling about, if the capital costs are high, then we try to bring down the capital cost to make it more digestible to do the new thing. But maybe that takes away from the ability to execute it effectively. And so now maybe we do half of the new good thing or cut back on the people that we're paying to install it or whatever it is, or cut back on the oversight. then it doesn't go well, and then that's just another reason to not do it in the future. Do you see that at all?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern and something we're always raising our hand about, right? If you go with maybe a less sophisticated product that can't do everything and you're not going to get the operations benefit, or to the point about the oversight and the commissioning, we talk a lot about facade commissioning, right? Because as much as we design the energy efficient mechanical systems, if you have leaks in your facade, right, you're just throwing out that energy and making sure it's all really sealed the way it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, so because my company is involved with more of the real estate and how we manage the portfolio, and we get involved to more than just the building performance a lot of time in terms of the planning the space and how you're trying to use it and what your long-term plan is in terms of occupying that space. We sometimes get to have the conversation around the building and the usage of that allows us to offset some of that upfront cost that is associated with these systems or improvements. For example, if a client is trying to have a collaborative space for their employees to really help their employees to work on a solution together, or there's a lot of face-to-face work that needs to be done, and they don't have a building that allows them to have that kind of space, there's a cost that is associated with less productivity or the employees not wanting to be in that space. So a lot of time we're able to wrap up that conversation in terms of the overall use of the space, which allows to address some of that upfront cost that is associated with the building performance improvement, and usually is a barrier. So I think we get that question a lot of time, that can we break this down to a couple of phases, or can we do half of that? And we really have to paint that bigger picture for them, that do you really want to do that? If you do half of it, or just some sort of small solution, it's really not going to get you to where you want to be as kind of a long-term plan for that building.
I know for commissioning, we talk about starting with an owner's project requirements, so starting with the goals in mind, and I'm sure you do as well, Michelle. I guess people on the podcast can't see me pointing. I'm curious, Michelle, in your experience, where is an example of maybe a win-win that you've found where you're able to wrap in the human side of things and the maybe comfort and the energy efficiency and building performance as well?
I mean, I want to believe that the right design, right, the most energy efficient, carbon-friendly, indoor air quality is the right solution for the occupants and the owner, knowing that they're doing the right thing. But everybody has different priorities. So to say that it's truly a win for everybody.
People also have different preferences.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Like a senior building's very different from I guess a market rate building where young professionals are going to live. It's very hard to, I think, come up with a catch-all solution for that.
Yeah, there's not one solution. And it's interesting because it's funny that you said, I like to believe that it's true. There is a sort of continued naivete that I have that there exists this win-win solution. And there are some like micro solutions that I feel like are win-win. But I'm always arguing with my partner about whether the world is zero sum or if there really are these. So I think there's like in existing buildings, for example, when we fix the ductwork, that we have really leaky ductwork, and you can air seal the ductwork. That's actually a super complicated process and doesn't always work that well. But if you can, then you lower your energy bills and you also improve indoor air quality. So those are the kinds of solutions that I like because it fits my mental model of like, wouldn't that be great if there were win-win solutions? But I think you raise a really good point that it's not always that way. There's not always one thing that's going to solve all of your problems, and you have to like make choices.
Yeah, it just sounds like it's probably easier on a micro scale. Very hard on a macro scale.
Yeah.
Which is, I
life.
think, I think that's life applies to many different
Right.
things.
It depends, right? If you're focused on that issue, you
Yeah.
can solve that one. But when you're trying to solve a whole host of them, right, inevitably there's some type of balance.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how have you seen the pandemic change our industry? We're a little bit maybe on the recovery side now, I guess. People are speaking, I think, less about it and everything. But do you think there's any lasting impacts on our industry, consumers, the clients that you work with?
Yeah, I can go first. So I think, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the most asked questions from us was around the air quality. All of our clients were interested now to know how can they address the air quality challenges in the building by various products and, solutions within the HVAC and, new solutions, maybe not from the technology, but marketed to the pandemic challenges started popping up from everywhere. So we had to jump into trying to evaluate these different technologies, perhaps some adjustment to HVAC. And it was interesting, right? Because we all often get the comment that, something is expensive or there is upfront cost. And all of a sudden, the clients were interested to spend that upfront cost to improve the air quality at their buildings. So I think that became a topic that a lot of people started paying attention because they felt the direct impact of that. I would say that the second thing that became important a little bit later as conversations were around coming back to the office, and in general, that whole sustainability topic becoming a center of the conversation, there was a health and well-being of people and occupants in the buildings became really important. And I would say that a big portion of that comes back to your building design, HVAC, the lighting, and the mechanical systems that are in the building. So we still see the impact of that now, and it has been so embedded in the conversations with our clients around the health and well-being that I still see that to be an important area of focus for a lot of our clients, and we're trying to really tie that back into the building improvements and HVAC and the role that the HVAC system and lighting system have in health and well-being of people in a building.
I completely agree with you. And even before the pandemic at JB&B, we were always talking about why you wanted increased outside air from a cognitive function. There's a Harvard study by Joe Allen that talks about why you need increased outside air. And we had started pitching this to clients, and some of them were interested, and others realized more outside air per person required more air handler space and the ripple effects of that. And now with the pandemic and the need for indoor air quality as a market differentiator, right, this is really coming into play. So it's nice to see that a benefit that we knew was there but just wasn't priority for everybody else is now becoming priority. The other thing I would add to that too is I know there's sometimes a concern about more outside air and what does that mean for energy and how do you look at that, and making sure now that you're putting in the most energy efficient solution. You can't just put in an air handler that's providing outside air. I mean, the codes have helped with this as well, but making sure you use energy recovery and capture all the waste heat, and then in the end, the energy impact isn't as much as once was perceived.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not necessarily a win-win, but as your loads are increasing because you're increasing the outdoor air, now it becomes even more important to pay attention to how you're reusing waste heat. Great. And on the commissioning side, are you seeing folks paying attention at the end of the job too, or did they lose track of the healthy indoor air quality goals towards the end?
I think it's something that does still get I think it's very situational. There are some projects that I've been on where they were on top of it, like they had their filter cleaning schedule, they had all their ducks in a row, and then there were other projects, like this one project where it was one of my first days back on site after the initial quarantine period. So this was, I guess, summer 2020, where I go and their ERV filters are replaced with cardboard. Like they just have cardboard in their ERV as like the filters. And that was horrifying to see.
Especially since it was the first time in the history of the world that heat filters were being discussed as part of, your daily news cycle.
And like there was no vaccine yet.
Yeah.
So it definitely made me talk about filters more often. It may not have always been my, I had only been in the industry for 9 months before the pandemic started. So I was still just learning, but filters and making sure that you're not just putting a giant filter there, that you're keeping the pressure drop across that filter in mind too. For older air handlers, those definitely became, I guess, a priority for me in my recommendations. And I always check them now.
That's great. And what are you seeing as some of the more exciting advances in HVAC, whether it's geared towards human comfort or efficiency? What are you excited about?
Well, I think given my position and the basically impact that we can make with buildings, I'm not always involved with the newest technology or advancement that is happening around HVAC. But one thing that I've definitely seen that is making a big impact, and I think it's about the time, is having more intelligent system that connects the different equipments within the building and be able to really communicate between those systems. So I'll give you an example. We have the building automation systems that are supposed to bring the most energy efficient and optimized way of operating an HVAC. And we all know that is not really the case. But even if that's the case, you still have your security system that, for example, how many people are entering that building every day, or you have your lighting system. And there's so many of these systems that are not talking to each other because they're operated in isolation related to the data input that they're getting. So what I'm really excited about is these new systems that are being introduced that in JLL we actually have acquired a system. We have acquired a system called Envio that is able to connect with these different systems and really communicate that, hey, from the security perspective, we only had 20% of our occupants entering into the building. I'm also reading from the lighting sensors that this part of the building is not really occupied as much. So let's have the HVAC system to run a little bit less related to those zones, or even, again, maybe not fully related to HVAC, but at the end of the day, when you're trying to do cleaning, maybe there are certain part of the building that you don't have to take care of because there wasn't much of an occupant sitting there on that specific day. So I'm really excited because I feel that as we become more efficient with the HVAC system and we're introducing newer designs, there's still this need of how to operate them efficiently. And I think introducing these type of system that can send that proper input of how these HVAC systems are supposed to operate is very important, and I'm very excited about.
I think one thing that I'm excited about, in addition to optimized BMS systems like you were talking about, on a simpler scale, are cold climate package terminal heat pumps, which just like fit in a typical PTAC sleeve. So they're, I think, ideal for any retrofit projects where you have a sleeve for either a gas PTAC, or you want to take out your hydronic PTAC altogether, or like you have some other terminal equipment there. You can just put it there, plug it in, and walk away. Theoretically, I haven't actually tested them yet, but I have quite a few projects that have specified them. I just reviewed a submittal for one, for one project that's going to install 400 of them. So those are something that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked a lot about trying to simplify things. I think I said it when there was an ASHRAE event and people were talking about exciting new advances. And I was thinking about your perspective of like being in all these older buildings and maybe not knowing what the newest, most exciting technology is. And, there are challenges to PTHPs in existing buildings. We probably could have a whole podcast episode about that, of course. But I think that component of looking at what's really working and what the challenges are. And you can either go full in, all complicated, let's get sensors everywhere, let's make sure it's tied together, but you have to pay a lot of attention to it. Or maybe there's this opposite side of let's get as simple as possible, make it super easy and plug and play. And maybe that's the easiest way to have a really unitized system that can turn on and off with the occupant in that room in a more simplified version where, especially in multifamily, where you may not have the capital that we were talking about before.
I agree with what both of you said. I'm super excited about smart buildings, and we're looking at just what you said at JLL on so many projects and integrating the BMS with all the other building solutions. So you're really optimizing the system. But to build on what you said too, the importance of commissioning with all of that is so essential, because you could have all of the fanciest solutions, but if they're not operated correctly, you're not getting the benefit that you hoped and the benefit that you paid for, and making sure you commission and retro commission and making sure that that's an ongoing process. The project doesn't end once you install it, right? It's constant tweaking, constant improving, and that sort of thing for the life of the building. What I would say I'm most excited about in the industry right now is just the impacts of Local Law 97 and decarbonization and the electrification of buildings. It's such an exciting time to be part of the solution of buildings. Before this happened and before electrification, even before the pandemic, when we started to talk about this, clients didn't care as much in the initial massing of the building. Everybody kind of thought they had it down. You leave space maybe for a chiller plant or cooling towers, and you had your local floor DX unit. And now it's such an integrative process. There's no one solution. The biggest thing is bringing in the engineer earlier on in the design process to really look through all of the options and figure out what the right solution is, because there's so many different ways to go about it. And building on, I know I talked a little bit about it before, but energy recovery systems on air side and water side, people didn't always see the benefit of that before, but when you're paying for it in electricity, it's a little bit more meaningful. Or if it means more space because your heating plant's oversized because you're not using the heat recovery, now it's really part of the entire conversation. And that's what's exciting for me.
Yeah, that's a good point, that decarbonization or electrification or all electric buildings, or however we want to talk about it, is not just, adding another percentage point of efficiency in your whatever, or going even from, a traditional boiler to a condensing boiler, which doesn't condense anyway, so it's maybe 80%. Anyway, we'll put that aside. But this is actually forcing us to think holistically about building performance and to take that different perspective of integrating healthy buildings with the HVAC system. It gives us both kind of the requirement to do that, but also the opportunity to do that. So I agree that it's a very interesting time. I like going last because I can just agree with all of you ladies. Are there any specific projects that you've worked on where you've applied these strategies? Any specific data or information you can share about how to it always sounds like a good idea at first, but then sometimes the challenge gets into the execution.
A lot of mine are in like that schematic or design part. Like there are 2 projects that I'm working on that have air source heat pumps for their electrifying their domestic hot water. But I can't talk about, maybe that can be a future episode topic.
Yeah.
It's exciting to dive into, but I haven't seen a lot of it because they're so new. I haven't seen a lot of them installed yet.
I feel when you're asking about the most exciting and the newest thing, ultimately,
it's a trick question.
Yeah, it is a trick question because it will take time to, have the full results of a system or a new design or new technology. But I feel that we have to remember there are a lot of components of these, as we discussed, that already existed before. And I think it's hard to say what the full impact of that would be, but I think we can predict that anything that helps us to run more efficiently in a building should have a positive results. We're at the point in our industry, in our world, that we have to make some serious actions again, to your point around decarbonization and that whole fight for the climate change. And I think I'm excited to see what the results of all of these technologies and newer strategies that we're putting in place, but all of that will show us, in a few years where we are. But I'm confident that they would be all helpful. So I don't have any specific project that I can provide 3 years of, data to you, but I'm confident that these are all right solutions that we shouldn't shy away from and really still push our clients to consider when it's appropriate.
I agree with you. I don't think there's a single project that I've started since 2020 that hasn't at least had it part of the conversation. And whether they decide to go with the whole gamut of all of the most sustainable, energy efficient, carbon friendly design or some type of hybrid, it's at least part of the conversation, which it wasn't before.
Yeah, and that's the first step in terms of moving the market. That's great. I want to be conscious of everybody's time, but we like to ask, when we have everyone back on the podcast in 5 years, what will we be talking about then?
It would be really cool to see these implemented, electrified, net zero energy buildings in implementation, talk about, the benefits of it and how we've built on it and what the next step is in design.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking in 5 years, I might actually have PTHPs installed somewhere. I can tell people whether or not they worked. Or air source heat pumps for DHW conversions. One day.
I love that. Well, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for listening. For more info, check out the show notes at swinter.com/podcast. That's swinter.com/podcast. Buildings and Beyond is brought to you by Stephen Winter Associates. Our goal is to improve the built environment. If you're on a similar mission, consider checking out our careers page. We have offices in New York City, Washington, D.C., Connecticut, and Massachusetts. If you have ideas for episodes, suggestions for guests, or general feedback about the Buildings and Beyond podcast, we'd love to hear it. You can get in touch by emailing podcast@swinter.com. That's podcast@swinter.com. Thanks.